get started. So one of the, important things to note with Vim, as I said, is that it doesn't have to be used through a terminal, right? It's not an essential point of using Vim. So I'm just gonna, should have had this open, my bad. So I believe this is it. Perfect. All right, guys, so get good at Vim, or get good at Vim, I should say. That's the whole purpose of this series, right? We want to get fast at using Vim, and we want Vim to become like a tool that is just a part of our arsenal as a software developer, something just to make our projects easier, quicker to manage. Writing code is easier to do, and at the end of the day, we want to be able to wow people. Not really, but that would be a cool thing to do. You might have noticed maybe some of your tutors are quite quick at moving around. I did, perhaps when I started out, and I really wanted to find out how they did that. And so I went and did that, and I can say that it is worth the time investment, but obviously it is a bit of a time investment. And the learning curve is a bit steep. And so that's why I want to kind of start off a series where we kind of mentally frame ourselves around the pros and cons, and not get too caught up on certain things that might make you feel like, wow, this is too much for now. I've got to focus on my assignments or whatever. So we just want to make it a simple thing that we can inch into the workflow slowly as we go, and then we get better at it, and eventually it becomes something that we can't really live without. So said, we'll be starting from the basics and working our way towards a path of Vim excellence. The reason why I say Vim excellence is that we're not aiming for mastery, right? We're not trying to, have people, go up to people and say, I know every single key combination in Vim, look at me go, right? Because realistically, that's really cool, great for you, but we just want to get faster personally and get excellent from a personal point of view, just so that we can use it as a real tool, not as something to show off or just to prove to people how fast you are. Although that is cool. And if you want to do that, totally go ahead. So, as I said, one of the tricky things about writing code is it's often not very enjoyable to manipulate text. It's quite a drab thing to do. It's tedious, and it's quite frankly boring. And oftentimes you just want, oftentimes you just want your code to go the way that you want it to. And so this is where we're going to get into Vim. We're going to discuss how to get faster at using Vim, and then we're going to discuss different kind of mental tricks or ways of thinking about using Vim and how it can suit you. So before, I'm not sure who shared their screen with that meme, but it is very funny. Like, one does not simply exit Vim, the age-old dilemma, right? Obviously, I think a lot of the jokes are maybe, just that. They're kind of jokes. I would be quite frankly a bit concerned if, there's a lot of developers, millions of developers apparently getting stuck in Vim. I'd have to ask myself, how do they even write code in the first place? But, it is what it is. So, but the most important point of this slide, and one of the points that I want to make as a key differentiation between, your typical text editors like Nano. And Nano is just what you're familiar with. If you've never dabbled around on a terminal with different text editors, Nano is just Word, Microsoft Word, or your internet browser, basically anything on your computer is generally nano. Your smartphone, you know, you type things in, you delete it. You might have a few control commands like Control C and, you know, things like that. But generally, you just type and that's it. That's all that there is. There's no modes, right? There's not different modes where you can do different things with text. There's just one mode, and that's insert mode. And so what Vim is a modal text editor. And that means that there is different modes. There's an insert mode, and then there's a command mode. Now, the problem is that people go into insert mode, and then they don't know how to get back to command mode. And without getting into command mode, it might be a bit difficult to quit. But maybe I'll show you guys a couple of ways today that you can quit and save a file directly from within insert mode. So one of the other reasons why having a different set of modes in your text editor is beneficial to a programmer is that maybe we want to do some cool things with text, right? Maybe we want to format it out, right? We're writing code. We don't have this special application, you know, like Word or PowerPoint that can format things in a specific way and do this and that. So maybe we want a way to do that, and to do that with our text editor without having to need external tools and a whole bunch of extra goodies in order to do some basic things. So that's one of the main purposes of using Vim, is to add those extra modes, to make your editor a bit more extensible, to get into an engineering term of putting it. Now, the funny thing is you know, the Emacs versus Vim. You know, if you've ever watched Silicon Valley, there's a funny scene in that where I think the guy meets a girl and then she's a Emacs user and he's a Vim user. Well, actually, he's the Emacs user and she's the Vim user. So I would side with her. But frankly, he gets a bit fed up and says, I can't have a relationship with you because you use Vim, which is quite frankly ridiculous. But, you know, there's a lot of developers that seem to operate on that logic. And so that's where the editor wars have kind of stemmed from. You know, as I'm saying here, I'm making a bit of a joke, but the fact is that, you know, it's quite a brutal landscape out there for editors. And the ones that have survived, that's the test of time, is Emacs Vim. Now, Emacs is sponsored by the GNOME project, which GNOME is Linux, you know, Linux/GNOME, if you would recognize those terms. Whereas Vim is born out of, I guess, well, it's born out of pure need, really. I mean, the reason why Vim was created was to allow people to edit text over a 300 baud connection. Now, 300 baud is very slow. You type one letter and then you wait, I don't know how long, maybe 30 seconds to a minute for it to show up on the screen. So you can imagine that the more commands that you issue to your computer, the slower everything's going to be. And so that's where Vim gets its real utility and why it was created. But as I said at the end of this slide, one thing I really want to make a big point on is something called name mnemonics. Now, if you're maybe studying to be a programmer, you like things like math, maybe you're quite a decently smart person, you might have heard about mnemonics before. You might use these tricks yourself in order to remember things, in order to make handling information and recalling information a lot easier. And so that's what I'm going to cover off in the next slide, is name mnemonics. Now, this is one of the other key aspects of getting good at Vim, is to understand that Vim is a system of mnemonics, largely. And once you begin to understand that, it becomes less about key commands, remembering, oh, it's the C, or it's the I, or it's this, or it's that letter, it becomes more about a conversation almost, or a set of words that you come up with in your head, sort of like a phrase, if that makes sense. And my example here that I'm trying to show you is CW in Vim will change a word. And that's a very simple thing to remember, change word, CW. And now the point of name mnemonics is that using the first letter, as we can see here, we use the first letter in order to abstract away this information. We just have to remember that. You're not going to forget colors starting with R. R is for red, O is for orange, for example. But the fact is that you don't have to pass in all of this information into your head. You just have to understand Roig Biv, right? So a lot of people who work with colors often remember this Roig Biv because that's how that's an easy way of remembering the colors of the rainbow, right? You can basically turn it into one word, and it makes it much easier for you to remember all that information. And so what are mnemonics? Well, they're memory devices, as I mentioned. They allow you to remember facts and locations of just about anything. And you might, if maybe you're studying medicine or other different degrees where they're extremely information intensive, that actually might be something that your lecturers and tutors actually show you. And there's many maps and mnemonic maps and all kinds of different mnemonics that help you to remember things. And at the end of the day, the reason why I make a big point about it is that we don't want to stress our minds when we're trying to program, trying to remember a bunch of key combinations. I don't like to use the word anti-pattern because it's so, controversial. But it kind of is in a little bit of a way. If every time you go to do something, you're sitting there for 30 seconds to a minute trying to figure out what's the key command for this, what's for that, maybe that's just not very a productive way of using Vim. Maybe Vim's not even something you might even need to use. But the point is that getting your head around the fact that we have a lot of mnemonics being used with Vim, it's going to make your life a lot easier in the end of the day. Now, as I said, the legacy of VI, how Vim was born, well, the purpose of it was to make it easier to edit files over a 300 baud connection. Now, as I said earlier, every keystroke counts in an environment such as this. And if any of you have ever worked over an SSH connection, which if you're doing Comp 2100, you might have done that at some point, you might notice that when you're trying to edit files, that it slows down, right? You type in a letter and it takes 10 seconds for it to appear. Now, the more commands that you issue to your computer, the more requests that are sent to the server, the slower everything is going to be. And so that's why Vim was born. Vim was designed to reduce the amount of keystrokes required, or the amount of commands that you send to a server in order to write code. It's as simple as that. Now, obviously, these days, we don't live in a land of 300 baud. The connection speeds that we have today are vastly faster than 300 baud. Trust me. But back then, it was really important. And that was the main reason why VI was born. And here's a great example. And here's a really good tidbit for any of you that love Unix. If you've ever noticed that Unix home folders start with this tilde, well, there's a reason for that. And that's because on the Lear Siegler ADM3A, the home key had a tilde on it. So when people wrote Unix, which is Linux, which is all of these operating systems except for basically Windows, there's a tilde that means home. And you might wonder, what a weird symbol. Why did they do that? Well, that's your reason why. It's home. On the computer that this was written on, it's home. And they're not going to change conventions. They're just going to stick with them because that's what people know. And that's how that convention came to be. In a similar respect, H, J, K, and L came to that convention in the same way. As you can see here, left, down, up, right is printed on the keyboard. And so that's why Vim uses H, J, K, and L to move around. Now, one little mnemonic trick that I came up with. Now, I'm not sure if any of you are left-handers, but I am. And frankly, my mind associates left with up and right with down. However, most natural right-handers recognize right goes up and left goes down. I must have been dropped on my head as a baby, but that's just how my worldview is. So I came up with a simple mnemonic trick for helping me memorize that J is for down and K is for up. And it was jown and cup. Now I know that cup is a real word, or at least sounds like a real word. And so that was my trick. Every time I press J, I go jown. And every time I press K, I say cup. Now, if I do it the wrong way round and it's jup and cown, well, neither of them are words. So I figure out very quick I'm doing it the wrong way. So that was my little mnemonic trick to remember J and K, just because I'm a left-hander and I'm a bit weird. But there's a practical example of mnemonic tricks, and you can come up with your own at any point in time. You just kind of have to associate a word with it. And it was written in 1976, right? VI is old, right? It's pretty old now. So it's amazing that we still find value in this editor. Now, obviously, it was improved over time with a lot of extra features, but the crux of it is still extremely valuable, even today, in order to edit text faster, to grind through your code faster, and just to waste less time in the end of the day. Now, as I said earlier, yes, it runs in your terminal. I mean, the most simplistic way to get access to Vim, to start using Vim, is to open up your terminal. And I'm almost 100% sure Vim is standard included on Windows as well. However, if it isn't, please correct me. I'm not a Windows user, as you can tell. But yeah, it runs in your terminal. And by extension, the modal editing, name mnemonics, and one more thing, actually. I want to make one more point. There's 3 things that you remember with Vim that make your life a lot easier. The first one, as I mentioned, is modal editing, understanding that there's different modes and which modes there are and how to access those modes. The second one is to make use of name mnemonics, is to understand that the majority of Vim key commands, or at least a lot of the ones that you might use frequently, like changing a word, i.e. pressing CW, are mnemonic, and they involve name mnemonics. And the third thing is the shift key. Shift means opposite. That's a great way to just internalize in your head that shift is opposite. Generally, shift key will do the opposite in a sort of way. Like, for example, if you press O, that opens a new line down, right, below the cursor. If you press Shift O, it creates a new line up above the cursor. And for most commands, the Shift key will essentially do the opposite. So maybe it goes up, you press Shift, it goes down. So there's 3 simple tricks to remember, and they're not very hard to remember. But once you get your head around that, you realize, hey, this is actually not that complicated. Now, the other thing about Vim, and if you want to start using a terminal-based Vim, or even using Vim within VS Code, is you often have an opportunity to customize Vim, and there's a lot of customizations for Vim. Now, as you can see here, this is my Vim RC, or at least a screenshot of it. And I've added in quite a few comments just to make sure that I understand why I've put these customizations in and what they do. Now, what a dot file is, well, it's a dot file. It's got a dot in front of the file. It's as simple as that. And typically when you go to create your Vim setup, you might create a .vimrc. Now, if you're on a Mac or a Unix-based computer, typically you can simply open your terminal and type in the touch command. Touch creates a file, and as we saw here before, tilde means home, as in your home directory, and then the file name will be .vimrc. So this will create a file in your home directory called .vimrc. It's as simple as that. Obviously, maybe it's not that simple, but once you get used to it, it feels quite the case. Now, the other thing I want to make a note about creating .files is it is a great idea, a fantastic idea, to be very anal about commenting. Now, often in code and stuff, there's a lot of developers that have a lot of opinions about comments. But when it comes to configuration files, I will always preach for put comments in, damn it. Realistically, these are your configurations, or else someone's going to look at it. You know, if you don't put in comments, you know, 2-3 months later, it might not even be 2 or 3 months. It might be 1 week. You got to open up your configuration file and you've got no clue what's going on, right? You've got a bug or something, something's not working as it should, and you don't know why. And you're going to get stuck for hours, and that's the last thing that you want. So I think comments are a great idea. The amount of comments that are in here might be making you think, wow, that's a bit, you know, ugly. But, you know, it's not enterprise code, it's a configuration file. So I totally go for that approach. Now, as I said, Vim can be customized to suit your needs precisely. And that's probably one of the greatest aspects of Vim excellence, or getting good at Vim, is that as you go, you'll find that, wow, I can really customize this application specifically to my needs. Every little key command, if you're willing to spend the time, can suit exactly the kind of development environment that you want out of your computer. And there's so many plugins these days for Vim, you can basically think of it like you can set it up as an IDE. I'm not going to try and pretend that you can't, because you absolutely can. It doesn't make up for an IDE. It's not a replacement for an IDE. I certainly would say that if you want to start debugging your code, I'd absolutely stick to using maybe an IDE or a debugger. However, you can obviously do it within Vim, but it's kind of, you're really pushing the envelope there. That's just my opinion. And maybe I'm not happy to stand by it, because I might start using Vim-based debuggers in the future. But realistically, I think the greatest benefit you get out of Vim is modal text editing, name mnemonics, and, you know, remembering the shift key as well. Being able to just do simple things with text very quickly. And I'll show you in a minute, you know, some examples of what you can do. So I've got some exercises for you guys, and I will share the slides later. So there's a really cool game that I got started out on called the Vim Adventures Game. It's really fun. I'll show you very quick what it looks like, but it's a really hectic game, guys. And if you're just getting started out, one of the hardest things when you're a fresh beginner is just getting used to the simple, basic navigation. And once you get your head around that, as I said, you can start focusing on just saying, look, these are combinations of words, almost like sentences or phrases. And then you can start playing Vim almost as if it's an instrument, right? Almost as if you're a keyboard player or something like that, playing an instrument. Now, the other thing is Vim Tutor. Now, this is the official introduction to Vim. So if we go Vim Tutor, my typing's so bad. This will bring up the Vim Tutor. So as I said, this is like the, the official introduction to Vim. And if you're a fan of terse, straight to the point documentation, check this out. This is really for you. And last but not least, we also have a YouTuber that I'm absolutely a fan of called Primogen. He does a series on basic Vim movements, and most importantly, is going to get you super excited about using Vim. You might find this guy hilarious. I find him hilarious. He's a really nice dude, and he helped organize the Vim conference just recently. He's also a senior engineer at Netflix, so I'm sure he knows what he's doing. So as I said, thank you. I'll also link my dot files. And just before we finish up, I'm going to give you a quick demonstration of using some Vim features that I love. And then I'll leave it to you guys to, give it a shot and figure out if it's something that is a good fit for you and good fit for your workflow. So we're going to come here. I'm going to open up iTerm, which is my terminal emulator. Realistically, you can use any terminal emulator. Don't really worry about that. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to open up a temp folder, and then I'm going to show you what it looks like when the first time you open Vim, a stock Vim configuration. So the reason why I'm doing this is just to load my Vim with no configuration. So you don't have to do that yourself, but this is just an example. Now, when we first open it up, it's going to look a bit freaky, right? It's not very interesting. We've got these commands here, and you're not really sure what to do, right? You don't even have an indicator here to say if you're in insert mode or which mode that you're in. And you go to type and, wait, nothing's happening. I'm hitting the T key. There's nothing coming out. Well, it turns out, as I mentioned before, Vim is a modal editor. So there's modes, right? To press I, you go into insert mode. And in this mode, it simply works as a standard text editor. And now, in order to enter command mode, we hit the escape key, right? So it's hard to tell that we're in command mode because this is a stock Vim configuration. But if we look down the bottom here, this is our command bar, the very bottom line. You wonder why the text stops there? And there's a reason why. If I hit Shift and then I hit the colon key, you can see down here that we can start entering a command. Now, if we hit Q, it's going to quit. But unfortunately, we've made some changes. So Q, exclamation mark, will do that. Now, another thing to remember about using Vim is that there's little tricks to save you a lot of time. You just saw this key, the exclamation mark. Well, typically that means force or to run a command. And I'll show you what I mean. So we're going to go into the stock Vim again, and I'm going to hit Shift colon again, and it's going to open up the command mode. And what I can do is hit exclamation mark, -- ls, and it's not going to run because we're in the stock Vim and it actually doesn't have the capability to do that. But in my Neo Vim, that would work. But anyways, so the point is that I'm going to show you a blinged out Vim configuration now, just as a quick inspiration. And you can kind of get an idea for what it's capable of. So I'm going to go to my, what's it called? I'm having a mental blank. I'm going to go to my dot files, right? All right, so I'm going to open up nvim. And now we're going to see something cool, right? One of the cool things about having an IDE is adding a start screen. Well, it turns out you can add a start screen into your Vim. So that's something cool. And it's going to remember your recent files and things like that there. So we're going to open up an empty buffer. And I'll go into buffers and splits and more complex Vim commands in the future. But I think for today we should keep it basic, stick to basic key commands, and as I said, name mnemonics, modal editing, and the shift key. They're three things to get, to memorize and to get used to. And once you do, it makes a lot of the rest of using Vim quite procedural. So I'll give you an example of something that is really cool with using the modal system of Vim. And this is an example I love. So I'm going to hit insert mode, and you can see down here it says I. And this is in my blinged out configuration, as I said before, but I just want you to be able to see down here when we go into insert and normal mode, just for this demonstration. Obviously, this works exactly the same in Vim. I'm going to open up my key caster just so you can see what keys I'm hitting. There we are, perfect. All right, cool. They may be just sort of in the middle of the screen for now, but it's, we'll just deal with it as we go. All right, so we're going to hit insert mode. I'm already in insert mode. I should have checked. We're going to make a list of things. All right. Now, in order to yank this whole list, there's a variety of ways of doing it. And I'd say probably the easiest way to do it, and typically the way of selecting everything in your screen, is to hit GG, Shift V, Shift G, and then Y. Obviously, that was a way of selecting the entire buffer window, but that's just one example of using Vim shortcuts. So what we're going to do now is we're going to use the visual mode, but the visual block mode. And we're going to do something really cool, and I'll show you what I'm going to do in a second. So we've just copied this line of text, and I'm going to show you how we can paste the line of text above list and also below things. So firstly, we want to put the text we just copied, which is list of things, at the bottom of the list of things. And there's a variety of ways of doing that. But seeing if it's at the bottom of the buffer that we have now, let's just hit Shift G. It's going to take us to the bottom. Now what we can do is hit P, and that's going to paste our text. And that's all we have to do. Hit one button and it's P. We don't have to hit the control button, but again, we're in normal mode right now. So we want to go to the top and we want to insert another one of these above this. So we're going to go GG. It's going to take us to the top. And did you notice before when we hit P, it's going to enter below? Well, what happens if we do Shift P? Oh, wow. Very cool. It entered above. So that's a very simple example of using the Shift key and how it just simply does usually the opposite of what you want to do. Another example I'll show you very quick, another great Vim key command that I absolutely love. You're moving around the buffer, you're going JJ, KK, whatever you're doing, and you want to create a new line below list where you hit O and you start typing. Done. All right, cool. That was good. Well, what about if we want to go above the word list, above where our cursor currently is? Well, what do? We use the Shift key, of course. We go Shift O, and then we start typing. Very, very handy. All right, so back to my original example. I want to show you how to create a list of things in Markdown, right? So we're trying to, create, we're in a lecture. This is a great example of where I've found them very useful. You're in a lecture and you're just typing in things line by line. And, you don't want to deal with things, like check boxes and stuff. You just want to write your stuff down. And then later on, what we're going to do is we're going to add in the check boxes posthumously. Now, what we do is we hit the Control key and then we hit V. And if you can see down here, and the reason why I'm in my blinged out Vim, is just so you can see highlighted that we're now in visual block mode. Now, all we have to do is hit K, and again, I've memorized it as cup. We're going to go to the top. However, that's not a very efficient way of doing it, so let's go back again. Now, if you remember before, The GG takes us to the top. So that's a quicker way of doing that again. And there's many quicker ways of doing things when you actually have blocks of code, for example. But we're going to do something really cool now. We want to turn this into a list of things with checkboxes, all right? So what I'm going to do is, again, using the Shift key and memorizing the Shift key, I'm going to do Shift-I. Now, what does Shift-I do? Well, insert typically puts you, you've got your cursor right here, insert puts you there, right? It puts you after the cursor. What if we want to go before the cursor? Well, again, it's a matter of using the Shift key. We go Shift-I, we go before the cursor. But here's the really cool trick about visual block mode. We're going to start typing some things in. And again, I want to make a list as if we're in Markdown, correct? All right, so we've done that. Now, what happens when we hit the escape key? Let's look. Wow, we just made a list of things in, you know, maybe about 3 or 4 commands, and just by using some simple tricks such as remembering the Shift key, understanding the different modes that we have in Vim, we've just done something that's really powerful. This is, you know, I don't know about you guys, but I often use quite a few Markdown files. And when you're working on projects, you might have to write documentation and things like that. And this is going to make your life a lot easier. And so that was my main example for today. I wouldn't want to bombard you with too much information, but I hope you see the value here in where Vim commands start to really shine. And I want to show off one more before we go. And I'm just going to hit Q, and then actually I want to show you one more thing about modality, or the mnemonics. What is Q short for? Q is short for quit. What if we did QA, quit all? What if we did that, quit all force? That's just going to kill everything, right? So it's a very simple way of remembering that. All right, so I'm going to go to do one more thing, and this is a project I worked on a little while. So I'm going to open up this, I'm going to go to CD to, here we go, just go here. All right, so we're working on some code, right? I'm going to type in nvim, again, using my fancy text editor. I'm going to go src, and then we'll do factorial example.rs. All right, so we've just opened up a section of code, right? And all right, so we want to make one change to this file and then close it. For example, we don't like this. Maybe there's a typo, and we want to change that. Maybe the word took is wrong or whatever. But we just want to do that one thing. Well, there's a number of ways of doing it, and I'm going to show you a quick example. So if you remember, J is the direction key to take you down. So what if we hit J17? Well, it's going to take us down to line 17, which it didn't because my damn thing is in my way. Again, you can customize Vim to be very, very fancy. My one downloads the Rust language service. Let's get back to the example. I don't want to distract you guys. So we hit J17. It's going to take us down to line 17. As we saw, it's just being a bit slow there. Now, we want to change this word took. And now there's a really simple way of navigating across the line using the W and the B commands. It basically takes us to the start of each thing. So it's a really easy way to, you know, move around. So we jump down to the line that we wanted to go to, and we want to change this word here, right? So we just hit W, W, okay, we're here. Now we remember the name mnemonic trick. C for change. We hit change word, and that's it. So that's another really awesome trick that I use all the time. I love the change word command because it really saves you so much time. And now say we want to change this finish right here. Well, you can just basically hold W. It's going to take you there. Maybe you went a bit too far. You hit B again, you hit CW, and then you can change that to what you want. It's just a lot easier to move around using these kinds of commands once you get used to them. And so there are a couple of examples of the things that I've made a point of in my slides, which is, again, the modality, the modal features of Vim. Being able to do really cool things, you know, like visual mode like that, for example. Normal mode like we're in now, where you can do things like, say we want to delete 5 lines, I just deleted 5 lines using D5D. And that's about it for today. So I think one thing that we can get into later on in the piece is maybe some more complicated Vim commands, all sorts of stuff you can do with Vim. But I think from my perspective and what I've found most useful is these simple tricks. Just to remember that Vim is a modal editor, to love the fact that Vim is a modal editor, to appreciate the mnemonic system that they built, to understand that, and to kind of make it easier on your mind mentally, and then also to remember the shift key. The shift key is really useful. So that's about it for today. I think I'd love some suggestions about if you guys have anything specific you want to learn in Vim or anything else like that. And I would be happy to teach you guys at some point in the future in the next workshop. So thanks all for coming. I must say, you know, that was a long, you know, conversation, single-sided conversation. It's often very weird doing things online, but I hope you've enjoyed it and I hope you've learned something along the way. So thank you very much, everyone. Any questions? Any questions so far?
No, I think that was pretty clear. But
Awesome.
thanks for that.
Do you find that the 3 key points that I've highlighted, do you feel like that they might make it easier for you to approach Vim, or maybe you are an experienced Vim user, but just to make that learning curve a little bit more approachable?
Yeah, I mean, I use Vim like sort of frequently as well.
Okay.
And I find that it's, especially when you're sort of getting into it, it's hard to sort of build a mental model around the usage of it because
Yeah.
it's sort of when you start or when you're thrown in. I think when I started, it was sort of a few years ago, and it was one of my mates was just showing me the, you know, the like macros or whatever it was at the time. And
Yeah.
he was just like, you press this key, then you press this key, then you press this key. And in my sort of mental model of it came to like, okay, so you've got these sort of like key presses that map to the sort of functions. And I felt like that's probably quite a destructive mental model to have around it, because now
Yeah.
you're trying to figure out which keys sort of perform which functions.
Yeah, exactly.
And whereas sort of, I think a more healthy mental model is to just remember that it is, you know, it is a modal editor, and there are sort of these really basic ones. You don't have to jump into it on the deep end. Just figure out the ones that you like are nice for your workflow, and then as you get more and more comfortable with it, expand out a little bit and look at a few different commands and try with macros and try just slowly level up your sort of intuition around it. But yeah, I felt like that was quite a nice introduction to just how to think about it, which, you know, initially being absent of that, it took me a little while to finally sort of like reverse build that, like work back from, you know, like the first thing I learned when I was doing it was just macros, right? Which was, yeah, it's a useful tool, but that's kind of the only thing I used it for when it was just like large patterns of text editing. But you know, when you want to use it as a daily tool, you can just do that.
Yeah, the macros are great. Trust me, they are great.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I think if that's definitely something we should cover off in the future. because when it comes to editing big code bases, maybe making a really small change, but a macro is going to save you a lot of time at that point. So,
Yeah,
or using
repetitive tasks.
By any chance?
Say it again, sorry.
I was just going to ask, what were you using the macros for?
Oh, I use it for like anytime. So, for example, like there's one of the projects I'm working on now. It's kind of like a passing process,
Oh
and
yeah,
you're passing many different types of essentially packets, right? But they're all very similar in the sense that like the functions you're calling on them are like just they're off by like maybe like one or two characters.
yeah.
So you're repeatedly pressing, like if you weren't doing it with that, you'd essentially be repeatedly copying and pasting and then changing one or two letters or whatever, right? But you can kind of just, like write it, like, copy the yank the text into a register, paste it, and then you just, and then you just specify like the characters that you want, and then you're just like, running the macro with the two characters, which is quite a nice change from just control C over and over again. But like, usage around. One thing I was pretty impressed with was your intro. Like one thing that I haven't, so I came from Emacs a while ago as well. Is that sort of introduction screen that you've got, like where you've got the recent files.
Yeah.
I miss about Emacs. Like I used Spacemacs. I don't know if you've heard of Spacemacs, but it's got like it's got like an evil mode, which is kind of, you kind of join Vim and Emacs together, and you do get a bit of both, but it is a bit heavier on, like, it's just like if you don't really understand Lisp, when you start doing your configuration around it, it becomes very difficult.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. Which is kind of why I moved back to NeoVim. Just because I found it easier. But one thing I missed from Spacemacs was that intro screen where you could look at the recent files and that sort of stuff. Another one I'd like to look at is your shortcut that you use there, which was like Z, and then like obviously a project that you've associated to.
Oh yes, that is a fantastic utility. It's called Z. Literally, it's called Z.
Okay.
There's FASD. There's a whole bunch of them, but if you search for Z, jump around, that'll probably pull it up. It's just like a quick jump tool. It just remembers like it's a frequent / recent list of files and directories that you've visited, and then it will remember that for you. So it should be quickly. I'll actually just paste it into the chat real quick for you guys. This one should be it. Yeah.
At the moment, what I'm doing is I'm essentially just making, like, in my dot files, I just make a whole bunch of aliases to like. Oh. So like I've got the ones that I frequently use, like for example, my Z shell RC is I've got ZRC, and that just takes me to it, which is fine. But like I've just copied an alias in there, which is what I do for my projects. But that looks like a much more eloquent tool, I'll say.
It's great, man. It's one of the best tools I've ever installed on my computer. It really does save literal time. You don't even configure it. You just install it and you go. I mean, it's about as simple as that. There's no real configuration either. So it's pretty awesome.
Yeah, I'll have a look at that. That's cool.
So what I was also going to mention was that you can grab all of my dot files, and I will link them at the end of this presentation. I'll upload the slides onto Discord, or I'll make sure that it's available to you guys. So in fact, actually, why don't I just link it in the chat right now? What am I even doing? It takes me half a second to do that. There you go. And then you won't have to bother messing around. So check out my dot files. It's a great way to as I mentioned before, I put a lot of comments, a lot of effort into setting them up, just so that this, this is more of a dot files thing and not related to Vim. but I have my configuration file that is my configuration file. If I ever get given a computer from my job, or I get a new computer, or all this stuff, it's kind of portable, and it's something I can take with me as I go through my career and my life as a developer. So that's the real benefit of having a well-managed system of dot files, just for your basic applications that you might use on a day-to-day. If you guys haven't maybe started thinking about setting those up. So yeah, definitely recommend. And the biggest recommendation I can make with dot files is put them on GitHub. Not maybe on GitHub, put them wherever you want, just put them somewhere backed up. Because I lost all my configuration files at one point, or my Vim one, and I was pretty sad. I was really sad. But I had the motivation to rebuild it, and I rebuilt it even better. So maybe it worked out for the better, but honestly, please back it up. Don't make the same mistake that I did.